Good morning. This is Fresh Art International, and I'm Kathy Bird. Today's show on Jolt Radio in Miami is about sound. I'm a sound collector, you see, have been for years, and I'm thinking about sharing with you the contrast between our everyday surround soundscape, ambient sounds, the sounds of celebrations, the sounds of change. Some of the sounds we might not notice right at first. Some are people's complete preoccupation. And today's show will feature sound artist Stephen Vitiello in a conversation I recorded with him for a podcast episode a couple of years ago. It will also feature sound and performance art, sound related to performance art brought to Miami Beach during Art Week 2016. And then, sounds of today, what's happening in downtown Miami. Let's begin with Stephen Vitiello. He's a sound artist who's done residencies around the world. What he's known for, and you'll be hearing, I want you to be listening out for this, is a 2010 piece called A Bell for Every Minute that he produced and was played on the High Line. It was played at MoMA. And also for a more chilling experience he had as a resident of the World Trade Center. Believe it or not, they had an artist residency in one of the towers. He recorded in 1999 the winds after Hurricane Floyd. And now we listen to them, they have an eerie quality. So let's hear from Stephen Vitiello. Today I spoke on Skype with Stephen Vitiello. Stephen is an electronic musician and sound artist who transforms atmospheric noises into soundscapes. One of his installations is now featured in Soundings, a contemporary score at New York's Museum of Modern Art. Curated by Barbara London, this is MoMA's first ever exhibition dedicated exclusively to sound art. A lot of museums have been exhibiting sound art, and why is it suddenly in the news?
Because it's a museum of modern art, that puts a much larger stamp of validation on it. It also puts it under a microscope, so even the little bits of press that I was looking at today are already questioning, well, is it really all that good, and or is it going to succeed or fail, or, well, and it's kind of what happens with major surveys, even like the Whitney Biennial. People are usually ready to knock it down before they even take it all in. But I think, the survey shows, ideally sound art will infiltrate the art world, and just the way that you have a large group exhibition and there might be a video work or there might be two video works. My wish is that in the future there will be a sound work rather than sound art often getting bunched into these shows where it's all work about that has the common technology of sound, but is not necessarily thematically connected.
Now installed in MoMA's Sculpture Garden, A Bell for Every Minute was originally commissioned in 2010 for a year-long installation on the High Line in New York. I loved how you described it as a cultural soundscape when it all comes together. Tell me about that.
It's a piece that was on the High Line for I think one day less than a year, from 2010 to 2011, and it was made for the High Line. To describe the piece quickly, what I did was recorded bells all over, every bell I could think of, and the people at Creative Time helped me think of other bells. And then I chose 59 of them. And at the beginning of the hour, all the bells ring together so that Boots the cat's bell rings at the same time as the synagogue, at the same time as the Hare Krishna temple bell, as the New York Stock Exchange. They're all ringing together on one even plane. And then after that, one bell rings each minute individually. And there's a aluminum 5 foot by 4 foot sound map that's engraved that traces what you hear on each minute, and also you can kind of follow to where I recorded it.
So your installation at MoMA will be outdoors, I understood.
It is. Yeah. The rest of the exhibition is on the third floor. It's not a piece that belongs in a black box. I make other pieces that, where I want to kind of put you in that kind of immersive space. But this piece, A Bell for Every Minute, it really should kind of be in harmony, in concert with the city. So I asked for the sculpture garden. So there's 5 speakers out in the sculpture garden and the sound map.
For the Highline, Stephen created a public art experience with sounds ranging from a tinkling cat's collar to the clang of the New York Stock Exchange.
There's the people who go and they know what they're going for. And then there's other people who just sort of stumble upon it and may be surprised about kind of reorienting their senses so that they're listening rather than looking, and sometimes find that they can listen for a much longer time than they might have looked if they were just going to stand in front of a single work of art.
I can see that would be the case for the Highline installation.
It's interesting, sometimes I get feedback, like somebody emailed me who I didn't know, who said that they jogged there every day, and it took them a few days to notice even that they'd noticed these bells, and then they stopped and they read the sign and they started to look forward to, as I run by there, each day, what am I going to hear tomorrow? Then somebody sent me a novel, like a Wall Street thriller, in which the character goes, and he says, and then he went up onto the Highline to listen to his favorite work of art, A Bell for Every Minute. One of the beauties of going into larger public spaces is that you do open yourself up to a wider audience, and sometimes an audience that you can catch by surprise. I got a larger audience for that piece than probably anything I've ever done, and the appreciation is something that surprised me because it came from children, it came from joggers, it came from art people, it came from grandmas, and it seemed that the bells could speak to them. It didn't have to be my language. It didn't have to be an art language or an academic or a conceptual thing. They could interpret it in any number of ways, and it was meaningful, which is great.
What you just heard was Stephen's 1999 recording of Winds after Hurricane Floyd. That year, he was artist in residence on the 91st floor of the World Trade Center. That's
the piece that ended up being, I guess, representing that whole residency. It's called World Trade Center Recordings, Winds After Hurricane Floyd. And it was second strongest hurricane to hit New York in the decade. We couldn't go in the building during the hurricane, but the morning after it peaked, I went in, and there was a term that I was told was called weeping in architecture, but the building was still so wet, and the winds were still strong enough that it really felt you felt the physicality of movement, and you also heard it. And in that work, the recording of mine, it's often said that the building sounds like an old ship kind of creaking and cracking in the wind.
That's a haunting thought, really.
It is, and it's, it wasn't until I could hear up there that I became a little afraid of heights. Everything felt very artificial until I got those microphones working. And then once you got the microphones working, you realized you were on the 91st floor, and you were way up above, in some cases above the clouds, up above planes and helicopters, definitely above people. And there was a real vulnerability and fragility of being there. I mean, that I'm not saying that in any way had anything to do with predicting the terrible things that came, but it just the physicality of being becomes much more, I think, sensitized when you can hear.
You became aware that the building was actually a fragile being in a way.
Exactly. And I was often there, at night. It was, I don't know how many thousands of people occupy the World Trade Center. So it's not to say that I was alone, but in many ways I did feel alone because I was isolated in my studio. Most of the building's lights were off. And that fragility was kind of amplified by that feeling of just being in this weird little black box studio, looking out over the city.
During his 2013 residency at Robert Rauschenberg's island home on Captiva in Florida, Stephen made a profound discovery. Rauschenberg had recorded sound too, with cassette recorders and an underwater microphone.
I used my own audio recorders and microphones, but I sort of touched his things and just loved being able to open up a closet and go, wow, there's Robert Rauschenberg's cassette recorders. And I'd open up another drawer, and there were these underwater speakers that were not fully functional, but even dreamed of using my underwater microphone and his underwater speaker.
And now you have maybe an awareness of what your own artifacts are going to be.
I think that's true. And one of my many backgrounds was working as an archivist. And while I was in New York, I worked for Electronic Arts Intermix, which is a video art distributor. I worked for the Kitchen as an archivist. I worked for Namjoon Paik over 12 years in all sorts of capacities. And I'm not ever going to claim to put myself on that plane of some of the artists I've worked with, but I do try to value the work that I do and keeping track of it, keeping good records, keeping formats migrated. Even going back to that World Trade Center piece, the Whitney bought it in 2002, and I came in and I handed them a DVD disc, and they said, oh, this was 2002, but they said, we don't accept digital media for acquisitions. And I said, but it is a digital work. And we had to then negotiate, well, what are you going to get? And the format I was giving them, DVD audio, is actually now an obsolete format. So I also gave them data backup of the files that make up the 6 channels of that work. And it made me think for future acquisitions, as other people bought pieces, or I wish other people would buy pieces, who's going to take care of them? What are they allowed to do? What kind of backup files or even equipment should go with the piece?
You said that you are emotionally attached to sound. What do you mean by that?
In film, for example, a lot of the emotional content is often created with sound. You could take a scene and make it happy, scary, sexy, sad by changing the soundtrack. And I found that it's the connection I have to the world is a lot of feeling that I feel comes through listening. The physical impact of sound is very emotional to me. I've found that in installations that I can really play with the kind of the psyche of the visitor, at least play to it by the manipulation of sound in space, and that if it's done right, you'll end up feeling first and thinking second. I think that with visual art, you often you kind of intellectually process, and then you might be moved or not. With sound, I think it's the opposite. That feeling hits you physically, the vibrations of sound into your body, and then maybe you process what you're thinking. But it's just, I don't have a super visual eye the way so many of my friends do. I don't always notice colors or design problems, but I do listen first and look second. If you close your eyes, sound does suddenly seem much louder and richer and more finely detailed. Probably my favorite photograph that represents my work that I have is from Australia, and I told a group of school children who I kind of underestimated their real brilliance and their sensitivity. But at first I just thought I'd tell them a little and I'd go send them into my installation. But I said, if you could close your eyes when you get in there, tell me if you hear the piece differently. And then they had all sorts of questions that were incredible questions. But someone later gave me a photograph of one of the girls in the class with her eyes closed, listening to the piece. And it seemed like she was listening with her entire her entire being. And that picture makes me feel like I've done something for one moment that mattered.
That was an excerpt from The Sound of Red Earth, a 2010 site-specific work created by Stephen Vitiello in Australia. You can read more about Stephen and sound art on freshartinternational.com. We have a Facebook page, and I tweet every day at freshartintl. Now how about one last sound? Glass bells that Stephen played in a MoMA Sculpture Garden performance this August. You were just listening to a podcast that I recorded with Stephen Vitiello a few years ago, and the work still just sends me. I love it. I love listening to the projects that he creates. We're on Jolt Radio in Miami, Florida. This is Fresh Art International. And now I want to share some sounds that I collected during Miami Beach this month at Art Week. Tide by Side was the first event that we attended, and we actually did a show with curator Claire Toncon and Marinella Senatori, an artist who was had part of her team working on this processional, and it was celebrating the opening of the Faena Art District. In the sounds we captured, you'll hear the warm-up of a local percussive group called the Haitian Rara Band for the School of Narrative Dance, Miami. That's Marinella Senatori's project. You'll hear a giant piñata processional created by Carlos Betancourt. And lastly, you'll hear the brass band that introduced Anthony Miralda's Global Banquet that was brought to those who came to see the processional. Let's hear what they had to show us. That precedes a giant piñata by Carlos Betancourt.
Make it happen.
This piñata is topped by a golden pelican proceeding slowly up the street. The only sound it's making is the wind in its tassels. Now the celebratory sounds of a party. was the release of confetti. Red confetti flying through the air. Yes, there's one street sweeper with a handmade broom cleaning up the confetti off the street, metaphorically. Okay, that was really cool performance sound by a Haitian rah-rah band, a giant piñata exploding in the street, and a brass band that introduced an artist project who was meant to be feeding the masses that came to this processional. Also, while I was there at Tide by Side, I was super lucky to meet Yosvany Terry. He's an internationally acclaimed Cuban musician, composer, saxophonist, percussionist, band leader, and educator. And he is the composer of the sound of the Conga Irreversible. I think I pronounced that with a French accent the first time. That was dreamed up by Los Carpinteros. This was a performance project where dancers dressed in black danced the conga backwards, heading north on Collins Avenue. I was introduced to Yosvany in the street, and he was happy to tell me the story of this music.
First of all, I love visual arts, but there's something special here. It's like I've known them, and especially Marcos Castillo, since we were in 5th grade. We went to school together. We went through all the entire art studies. Of course, he was in visual art, and I was in music and saxophone. And we both arrived in Havana at the same time, and we're doing a lot of things. And my instrument is saxophone. I'm a saxophone player and composer. And, I'm coming from a family of musicians. My father is one of the Cuban legends within the Cuban popular music. But I moved to New York in 1999, and it was not until 3 years ago that I went to Havana, and they approached me because they have this idea of making this very unique piece. At the time, it didn't have any name. And they explained me the whole concept of it, in which they wanted the dancers dancing backwards, and they wanted to have a music composed to it that it would give an effect that would accompany the dance, the choreography. So we met there for several times, and it was good because we discussed and developed the concept of it, and then I went on my own and produced the musical sound of it. And for me, it was really interesting from the very beginning because it was a challenge. It was like trying to have 16 dance couple dancing backward. Now, the big challenge was that being carnival music, something that is very popular and massive, the challenge was like the music needed to have a groove for them to dance. I just couldn't arrive with something like experimental John Cage type of that. It wouldn't really serve the purpose of the music. So
what was the solution?
The solution was, go home and study also the music that preceded all of the carnivals in Cuba, and then figured out ways with all the musical tools that the composer have at his disposal to create the sound for this piece.
It's beautiful.
Thank you so much.
This is the Fresh Art International show on Jolt Radio in Miami, Florida. You were just listening to sounds from Tide by Side in the Faena Art District of Miami Beach, and my conversation with Yosvany Terry, a really important composer, jazz musician who's now teaching on the faculty at Harvard, head of the jazz department. So watch that guy go. I'm now about to talk about the music side of sound, and here with me in the studio today is Miami-based artist Monica McGivern. Welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Really happy to have you here because I've known you for years in so many of the roles you've played in Miami.
That's true.
And Monica has just covered tons of the elements of the art scene in Miami. She studied photography, and her documentary photography in Miami has encompassed contemporary artists, musicians, and social issues. And Monica, you grew up in a musical family, right?
It's true. I grew up choosing to play a low brass instrument because that is the instrument my mother played throughout her high school years, and so I took after her in that way. And also on the father's side of the family, he was one of 10 Polish children who were forced at a young age to all take accordion lessons. So a little bit of music in the family that instilled that sense in me.
Well, Monica, you were one of the women artists performing during the opening of Ground Control, Art Basel Miami Beach's 2016 public art installation in Collins Park.
Yes.
And I thought I'd have you here now to talk about what took place that night. Before we talk about this amazing project called Composition 18 that was directed by artist Naama Tsabar, I'll tell you that this public art installation this year was inspired by David Bowie, the whole project called Ground Control.
Yes.
And Nicholas Baum, who directs the Public Art Fund in New York City, curated this, and it was his last year to curate.
We were so lucky to be a part of it. Yes, a performance in Collins Park, that beautiful park in front of the Bass Museum.
That stares out, this long column of green that stares out at the ocean and the palm trees. It's perfectly situated. And this project by Naama Tsabar, she described for us on my show 2 weeks ago. She indicated that the composition included 18 female musicians, 3 compositions with the same structure, the same 4 chords, same beats per minute, same musical scale for the singing. Let's describe how it looked, Monica.
Well, we were each standing on our amps, 18 of us spaced out in sort of a rectangular grid-like pattern. So each one of us were facing outward as well. So we're not looking at each other, which is actually a musical practice that if you are playing in groups, it was actually suggested to me in my earlier music days playing the low brass instrument that I referred to, the baritone earlier, that when you're in a group, to turn away from each other and play is a much different experience for some reason. Energetically, the energy shifts, so it forces you to listen a lot more to each other. And perhaps that wasn't Naama's intent. Maybe it was just aesthetics. I don't know. I don't want to speak for her, but for me that was the experience as a performer, shifting the energy outward almost towards an infinite expression of that sound.
We're going to be listening to what I'm calling the second movement of Composition 18. I recorded it per Naama's invitation while walking around amongst the instruments. You'll hear an unevenness to the experience. I think it's an interesting way of participating in a performance.
Yes, this actually allows the viewer the experience of choosing, and just like a choose your own adventure book, as if you were reading. It's kind of like a choose your own sound experience. How does the viewer want to experience through choosing to walk through and blend the sounds or isolate the sounds based on how far or close they are in the field of sound?
So let's hear it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we come to your section,
Yes.
Monica.
Mm-hmm. Clearly, you can hear how fun that was.
People were having fun.
Yes.
For sure. And I'm wondering, let's describe your instrument.
Mm-hmm.
What were you playing?
So I was playing a bass guitar. It's aesthetically, they call it a Beatles bass. What Paul McCartney used was that style of bass guitar.
And I must say, Monica is a very elegant dresser when she performs. So accordingly, without knowing maybe, or with knowing, she was the foreground of several photos I took that in the background showed Ugo Rondinoni's Miami Mountain, which is a psychedelic stack of boulders.
Yes.
And Monica's top matched the sculpture, so it looked super dramatic.
Yes. It was almost exactly the same colors. That wasn't with intent. Just one of those things that you put on that you feel good about wearing and you feel confident in. So it was perhaps, I don't know, made for great pictures.
Do you want to tell us a little about what you were playing, what we're going to be hearing?
So what I was playing was as directed by Naama Tsabar, the artist of the piece Composition 18. I was playing a drone part, which is a very kind of at times fast. I was directed by her to play as if thinking about the wind, and in that way, the sound becomes almost unrhythmic but hypnotizing in its playing.
Okay, let's hear it then.
Mm-hmm.
So, Monica, how did that sound?
I thought it sounded great. It was such a beautiful experience for you. You had sent that clip for me to listen to, and that was actually the first time that I had gotten to just sit down and receive the sound in such a fashion. You know, when you're performing, it's a different way. It's a kinesthetic listening that you're doing because you're also, you know, going through the movements. So to just sit and receive the sound is a beautiful experience, and I can only imagine that's why people were just spontaneously laying down on the ground in the grass in that beautiful green park and just laying and receiving that sound bath.
Well, you've had another kind of bath in a way in the last year as a resident, an immersion in downtown Miami.
Yes.
At the corner of 10th and North Miami Avenue.
An immersion of sound and a field of sounds in much different, sometimes jarring ways.
And visual experiences too, right?
As well, yes.
Let's describe the neighborhood itself, just when you moved in. At the time you moved in, like, how did it feel?
It's an interesting situation. Being in the inside of this art residency is, I like to jokingly call it the IKEA social experiment, which is, it's almost the white wall gallery experience, the very modern, minimalist type vibe. And looking out the window, you see visually exactly what you were alluding to, the grit, more of the grit of the Miami experience that is not always advertised in the marketing and branding of this city. But it is there, and which is why I felt it was important to document visually. More of the dirt on the streets, the authentic Miami experience, passing by homeless people asking you for money on your way to parking your car in the street. It's a different layer of Miami.
I know we tell the situation of this residency. It was once known as the Cannonball Residency Program, and the last year it was taken on by the ArtCenter South Florida, and it has space for artists selected that live there for a few months up to a year, depending on their project.
Correct.
And you have been collecting for your residency project a visual narrative. Let's describe what your visual narrative is.
Correct. So I, as a documentary photographer, I feel like I've been documenting a language through light, right? That photographers tend to look at. So being in this environment, I was looking for the light and how it played in these gritty moments in the streets of Miami. So there's a lot of construction. The city in that area is being deconstructed and reconstructed in a very fast pace. So I felt the buildings coming down were a very large character in my photography.
So I'm saying, just rewording something I read, you wrote, a visual narrative at the intersection of homelessness, gentrification, deconstruction, and development. So let's look at a couple of your photos.
Sure.
I think a lot of people think you can't talk about art on the radio, but I've shown that you can every week.
It's true.
But this time I think it'd be kind of cool to look at a couple of the photos. The first one that I want to talk about is the everyday observers of downtown's life, which are the birds.
Yes. Well, I first noticed, again, as a building was being pulled down, there was this little sparrow that at the same time was coming back and perched with a twig in its mouth, kind of watching just as I was, his nest being pulled and teared down by this large crane. And it just gave me the really, connection with that bird. It's perspective of watching these things in the city. And so that began to direct my attention to more of the birds and what they were doing as watchers.
Right. And I think it's important to note that these photos are black and white photos.
Correct.
And you chose black and white for a reason.
Correct. Yeah, there's something about an archival perspective of just formalizing the moment in a very traditional photojournalist telling of the news, the hard news, the edgy news, and capturing it in that way, a traditional photojournalism editorial style.
And there's one photo you showed me last week that was quite disturbing, that pictures a man lying on the street with cars driving by. He's in the middle of the street.
It's true. So this was a scene that I woke up to, and I woke up because of the numerous amounts of horns honking. And so I went to the window, kind of blurry-eyed and looking out in the street, and unbelievably there was a man laying there, not moving. And for about 20 minutes, I watched this procession of these cars continuing to drive by, the motors. Of course they would slow down, but no one got out, no one stopped, no one even rolled down a window to see if he was okay, right? I could see that the ambulances were about to attend to him after some time. And
do you think that's a fact of life in that particular neighborhood where people driving through don't feel safe to stop?
That's a potential perspective, absolutely. The times, that I have been out on the corner, taking pictures of the construction and things like that, I've heard many times, be careful, and people warning me, be careful, this is a dangerous place, so it's possibly a good perspective.
I'd love to share now the sounds that you've collected from your experience, everyday experience of living at the corner of 10th and North Miami Avenue. So that was Monica's everyday downtown, and there are some sounds you've been collecting that are disturbing to you, and I've seen them in your photos. And I also want to know, why are they disturbing you when you hear the sounds of change, physical change. Maybe we should listen to the sounds first, and you talk about the emotions that they spark.
Okay.
Would say that's the opposite of the sound of a celebration.
I would say so.
What's your feeling about what's going on? What did we just hear?
So these sounds, pretty much a blend of the city, and I guess the reason why I feel it's so disturbing. I can use the example of a siren, for example. Excuse me. I would say at the beginning of the residency, I would notice that a siren would go off, and I would kind of be put on edge, as alarms tend to do. But as I realized that the blend of these sounds, I would hear the siren towards the latter end of this year, and it doesn't alarm me. And so I guess those being around all of these blends of sounds and almost it becoming the new normal and the normalization of these sounds, and it's just disturbing to me that we can absorb all of this movement and not really process it in a way, but we feel it, and there's a tension, and if you're not recognizing it, there's a part of you that's like not recognizing that this is becoming the new normal. That is what's disturbing to me, that you can be embedded in around all this tension and be absorbing it, but not being able to name it.
So what do you hope people see in this work? What are you communicating that you want them to see?
Mm-hmm. Well, from the archival standpoint of, just simply this is all happening so fast. And again, the normalization and this new normal, it's happening a lot of times before you can even process it. And so for me, taking photographs of it is a bit of proof that I was here, I was in this place, and the city looked like this at this particular time in its simplest form. And I don't have answers to a lot of those questions, but for me, feeling like I am experiencing this and I can't process it, the only way I know how to express it is to put it into physical form through photography or through documentation of the sound of it.
Well, I really think it's really interesting and important work. Mm-hmm. And it's quiet work, and it's not quiet in every regard. But I would love to share with our listeners where can they go to learn more about your work?
Sure. My website, monicaparty.com, would be a good start to see what I'm doing. And on the fun side of what I'm doing, I do have a personal band project, and we're called Mo Booty, Mo apostrophe Booty, Booty, and that can be looked up on Instagram, Facebook, social media. And that is a 3-piece band that I've been working on with collaborator Alexander Merbuti, and we started out with drummer Danny Kaye, and now playing with Cody Mentilis on drums.
I'd love to share one of the sounds of your band with our group for a going out party here.
Sounds good.
On the Monica Party Show.
Yes.
It's Dano, an original song written and recorded by Alexandre Merbuti and performed by Alexandra on guitar, Monica on bass, and Danny Kaye on drums. You've just been listening to Dano, an original song performance by Mo Booty Band, and I've had here in the studio with me today, my great pleasure, Monica McGivern.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. Just wanted to say I love what you're doing in the city and bringing this sort of art curation, learning how to speak about art on the radio and bringing it to an international audience. So thank you so much for having me. And just a shout out to Jolt Radio for having us here as well. For all the dedicated Jolt Radio people, that song was actually premiered way back at the beginning of this year And we premiered that song here, so it's so nice to have that time lapse to see what has unfolded in that year. And Fresh Art International looping into it is just such a good feeling.
Yes, and we can thank Mr. Jolt himself, John Kenye, for making this show about sound so good. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Yeah.
This is Fresh Art International, and I'm Kathy Bird. Thank you for joining us on Jolt Radio in Miami, Florida. Meet me here each Wednesday for more contemporary art talk.